1991. For those who lived through it, there is this one song that encapsulates that year. Talking Jesus Jones, right here, right now. In that chorus, right here, right now, there is no other place I'd rather be. Right here, right now, watching the world wake up to history. Now, if you've seen the video, it's him, it's the lead singer, watching a TV screen in a darkened room with all these images from what's actually Germany there on the screen. And it's kind of interesting. The song was not inspired by the events of 1991. It was actually inspired by the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The song was slated to be released in 1990 as a single, but it was delayed for reasons I don't know. But it was delayed until 1991, when, which was just such a fortuitous time for it to come out, because from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, it was just kind of the culmination of a lot of the 20th century. I'm going to quote Vladimir Putin here because I think that it's very, that talking about this stuff, it's very appropriate to quote the guy who started the Soviet Union. He said, "There are decades where nothing happens, and then there are years where decades happen." And certainly 1991 was one of those years. I was a sophomore in high school, and I remember, Gorbachev resigning as the head of the Communist Party, Yeltsin being elected as president of Russia. You had the Baltic, you had first Russia, the Soviet troops in Lithuania tried to put down independence protesters, and then that was followed by referendums for independence in Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania. You had first the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Hungary, and then the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. If you were American, a lot of these things might have been a little bit overshadowed, especially if you were my age, because January was also when the first Gulf War started, when Desert Shield turned into Desert Storm, and I remember sitting there watching as all this the black and white things on CNN, which at the time was considered the reputable source for news on TV at that point. You had a couple of people who were actually from CNN there on the ground in Iraq as this was going down. And you got a lot of blow-by-blow stuff there. But in the meantime, overseas, over in Europe, democracy was blossoming as nobody had really thought was possible. Growing up, Russia was always, Soviet Union was always, they were the big bad, right? They were the ones that were threatening us with nuclear weapons. They were the ones who were just, the Soviet state was just seen as the evil empire, which, it kind of was. Although by the 80s, it really wasn't capable of doing all that much, really. The Afghan war had just worn them down. I mean, they couldn't accomplish their objectives there. They but they were the ones with all the ICBMs pointed towards us. And of course, we had ICBMs pointed right back to them. And there is always a sense in the 80s that at any time the missiles will fly. I think that's, in a lot of ways, that's why when somebody's acting a bully or something, I'm like, no, this has to end now, because we know where that goes is, you don't let whatever's going to happen. I'm just done living in existential dread. I think that kind of thinking kind of helped formed a lot of how I am today. Jesus Jones happened before the grunge era, before his kind of that sweet spot where before stuff like Nirvana and stuff really took hold at least in the mainstream, and kind of got away from a lot of the more, what I'm going to call, uppity music from the 80s that were in actuality kind of a response to the existential dread that we lived under. The whole country went kind of nuts, so because there really was this sense of, live it up now and, be happy for the day that you have now, because you don't know when a flock of birds is going to send off some signal that causes the missiles to fly, which actually did nearly happen. And thankfully the guy sitting in the bunker decided, yeah, I don't feel like ending the world today, and didn't press a button. He actually, I believe, was awarded Hero of the Soviet Union for not blowing the world up due to a faulty sensor. But he would have been well within his guidelines to do so. In fact, those were his orders. If this thing happens, then press a button. And thankfully he didn't, and it was just we had the same thing happen on our side. We nearly launched because NORAD picked up some stuff on radar that literally ended up being a flock of birds. And I'm sure there are other incidents that we really haven't heard about that maybe didn't progress quite to that point, but everybody understood. And just the overall relief of what was happening in 1991. Of course, at the time, I didn't realize that the Jesus Jones song was about the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was 2 years prior, and didn't have anything to do with what was going on today. I just was like, that was just a happy coincidence. But it was also when I realized that there was something kind of wrong, because as things were falling apart, I remember Boris Yeltsin. I'm pretty sure it's Boris Yeltsin, just because he and Gorbachev were the only two leaders that I'd really heard about in the U.S. as a high school student. But calling for the U.S. specifically to send over a bunch of civics teachers, send over all the civics teachers we could spare, so that to help teach the Russians how to be citizens instead of subjects. And I'm not going to say that doing that would have prevented all this stuff we see happening in the world today. I'm not going to make that argument, because we don't know, but we do know what happened when we didn't. And as a high school student, I was more than happy to make that sacrifice, but also kind of from a more pragmatic, because I understood that, hey, we're growing up in the U.S. We understand things, right? Our families can teach us stuff. Our other adults around us can teach us what we really need to know. Do we really need? I mean, a class is a nice formal way to present these things, but a lot of the stuff could just be absorbed through just cultural learning as we grow up, as we mature. But they didn't have that tradition. They had no idea. So when I say that that was a sacrifice I was willing to make, I mean that perfectly seriously. That they needed it, and we could make do for a couple of years. But of course, didn't happen that way. I do remember Lee Hamilton coming to my high school, and when I was a senior, my family had moved from Illinois to Indiana. Lee Hamilton came to my high school and gave a really nice presentation on what on the bipartisan deal that he and the Indiana Senator Dick Lugar had worked out to the project to secure Soviet nuclear weapons, fund their scientists and stuff, so they didn't go wandering off to like North Korea or Iran or someplace like that. Keep them on the payroll, so things continue to be funded and greatly reduce the risk of nuclear proliferation. And he was very happy about it. He was very proud of it. And I mean, was it important work? I mean, yeah. I have to say that the world should take nuclear weapons seriously, and their proliferation, and to oh well, maybe a terrorist group could pick up a few scientists or something. I mean, it sounds good. I don't think it. Terrorist group isn't going to be able to do anything with nuclear scientists. They can't put together the facilities to make it worth their time. They're. I mean, it wasn't something that I really knew back in high school, but a few years later, I might have picked up on that. Mostly because in 1991, that was also the year that the World Wide Web was announced. It was also the year that the Linux kernel was first released. All these things happened in 1 year. Yugoslavia started the process of breaking up. Although I think that's actually still ongoing, because I remember reading last year, to my great surprise, probably because I'm American and we don't really hear news from that area of the world very often. But the NATO mission in the former Yugoslavia as the peacekeeping mission is still ongoing. We still have a handful of troops there from different countries to act as basically law enforcement, and so some of that stuff is still lingering today. Much more dramatically, what is lingering is the Soviet ghost, the Russia, and the KG, and and I hear oh, it's not the KGB, it's the FSB, but honestly, everybody that I respect as sources of information, people who've worked in the intelligence community, a Russian economist who's he does the Inside Russia. know, KGB. They're still the KGB. You know, same organization as the NKVD that was, you know, around during from the earliest days of Stalin, and just, you know, new name, new, you know, whatever, same organization. And few years after that, I want to say there was picked up a book at Walden Books. It was on half, maybe it's half price books, one of the two, probably half price books. It's called The Sword and Shield, the Mitrokin Archives. Mitrokin, I assume that's how you pronounce his name. I've only ever read it. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing it. But Mitrokin was a KGB, I believe, a major, who was tasked with. They had all these archives and records, and they were going to be moving them to another location, and they needed somebody to just go through them and decide what could be tossed and what to keep. And he sat there and he used his KGB training to write everything in microdot and stuff and smuggle out as much of what he thought was important as he could. And because it was, you know, the Soviet Union and everything is incredibly inefficient, nobody really cared that he was taking so long to do this job. I mean, progress was made, and, you know, eventually he was able to. He decided he got enough. People were starting to catch on, and he got in touch with British intelligence, and they smuggled him and his family out of the Soviet Union to the UK, where the UK handed him over to the CIA because the US was seen as being more secure than the UK, further away, harder for Soviet agents to get to. And you know, apparently he did not have a good time because the CIA did not believe that he was actually turning traitor, and they basically kept him as a prisoner. For all I know, he died a prisoner. I don't really know. Haven't really heard much about him except I read the book that was kind of a compilation of some of the stuff that he brought out. And one of the things that I really noticed was that a lot of the KGB successes abroad fell into two categories. Well, three categories. First one, bugging their own offices. Okay. Two, creating weapons caches all over Western Europe. It's like, okay, we're gonna have a communist revolution. We're gonna have partisans that need weapons. So here's just like, you know, here's a basement that we successfully hidden like a pistol and 50 rounds of ammunition and a couple of grenades, and they're in this particular spot behind the wall. Take out this brick, and you can access it. And they had all these records in there. And of course, I mean, the thing about the Soviet Union was that Stalin was not Lenin. Stalin was not actually a Marxist, in that he did not accept the necessity of a global revolution. Oh, sure, he'd help, you know, he'd help out others where he thought that it would benefit the Soviet Union, but it wasn't from an ideological standpoint of, oh, we support our communist brothers and sisters overseas. It was about trying to extend the influence of the Soviet Union politically. And so they really weren't, so the KGB never really was working towards a global revolution as everybody had been concerned about, because Stalin didn't care about other countries. He didn't care if other countries ultimately were communist or not. I mean, it was good for the brand, and if it gave him allies, sure, but he he wasn't gonna be, and the KGB records, reflect that. And he was a totalitarian. He was an authoritarian dick who only cared about his own power at home, and he the system that he left to others were softened over the years. Uh, but um, but that was but the so like a lot of these things, they're actually used by these archives were used by European countries to go around and find all these old hand grenades that were sitting there waiting to explode, because the thing about explosives is as they get older, they don't get less explosive, just less controlled. So, it's kind of important to find them before somebody else accidentally sets one off. It's an ongoing concern all around Europe with all the munitions that were just like dumped into the ground and forgotten about in battles. All sorts of unexploded ordnance all over the place, and is taken very seriously there, which it should. But the last category that they were really effective in was in information warfare. Um, they they took a lot. They did up a big report in relating to the Warren Commission. They were so proud of themselves of inserting a faked recording into the Warren Commission investigation into the assassination of Kennedy, which for 6 months led them to consider the possibility that the Soviet Union might have been involved in it. Complete nonsense. They literally just faked the tape. But they took pride in, hey, we derailed the assassination investigation for 6 months. Congratulations. But that was probably the first real hint of success in information warfare. The next big thing that was noted was their spin on the AIDS epidemic, where they convinced they had a lot of success convincing people in Africa that AIDS was a bioweapons test by the CDC, that the Americans had developed it and released it into Africa, and that's why it seemed to originate in Africa. And that had a lot of that there's a lot of that got a lot of traction. I know that in the early 2000s, I worked with a lot of people from Africa, and they fully believed it. It was truth to them. You could not tell them otherwise. And knowing the source of it and how they had and all this stuff, I just once I started finding resistance on that, I just kind of backed off and never brought up anything regarding health stuff at all around them. And that there weren't any problems at work or anything, but that was a very sensitive spot. And this happened in the 80s. The 80s is when they really did this, and this is still being passed around from one generation to another in the 2000s. And so you can see how kind of the things that were put in motion by the KGB can still affect us today. I know that that politically here in the U.S., some of the people who did a lot of things with like early right wing stuff. I believe it was it Lou Dobbs? One of those. Now I'm kind of wishing I'd actually written this down. But Behind the Bastards covers this with Robert Evans, one of my favorite podcasts. He kind of he has a whole bunch of episodes to talk about, the birth of how one person or another, different political extremists developed. And one of the things is that here's a guy who absolutely detested, was like he was a huge foe of communism, and yet he copied the tactics of the KGB spreading propaganda to spread his own stuff, and that's how it got into the religious right, and that's how it spread to the rest of America. So things that were pioneered by the KGB in the 50s and 60s are still used in the U.S. today to promote extremist political ideology. And and a big part of that, and I don't think that it was necessarily intentional or not, but it certainly dovetailed beautifully into it, was Rush Limbaugh. I remember I used to listen to him. I thought that he was entertaining. He was an idiot on some things, but I was young and I was willing to listen to people like that just because he was entertaining. And he would talk about fighting with or debating with liberals with half his brain tied behind his back just to make it fair. He would tell people that, I'm the smartest man in the world, and I read all these things, and if you listen to me, then you don't have to read these things. I'll tell you what the important stuff is and how to think about it. And that right there was a classic Soviet technique. You convince people to switch their brains off, and then they no longer the whole thing of cognitive dissonance, where you're trying to reconcile two conflicting ideas that are mutually exclusive, and your mind just comes to a screeching halt. Well, if you surround yourself with language like that, that cognitive dissonance doesn't happen. Yeah, you have two mutually exclusive, sometimes more than two mutually exclusive ideas or beliefs that are true for you at the same time. And no amount of logic or reasoning can talk you out of it at that point, because this is just the way it is. And your brain has learned how to avoid that conflict, to make what I would consider a normal person go, wait, what? Say that again? It's like today you see interviews on with people at rallies and protests, and they'll be asked about about two mutually exclusive things that are both part of their political rhetoric, and they don't see a problem with it. They don't acknowledge that there's a contradiction, or if it's a contradiction, it's something that it's only a conflict because of the way the question is asked, or there's a question of how they'll turn the questions back on the interviewer, because that's how you avoid answering a question, is by just responding to a question with a question. And um, or saying, I'm not going to say what I think. What do you think? You tell me your views. You tell me your views first. And then if you tell them a view that contradicts their view, then they just, well, you're not worth talking to, and then leave. That also is a defense mechanism. And these are all, you see that today in Russia, where when the Ukrainian military went into Kursk, and the people there were, they weren't concerned about a war that was happening just over the border. There wasn't really an awareness of it. I mean, there was an awareness. I remember, but awareness of it is a matter of politics. To be aware of something like that, to ask questions about it, is political, and they avoid politics. That whole don't think about it, don't ask questions, we'll give you the information and we'll tell you what to think. The governor of, I can't remember if it was Belgorod or Kursk, was in a live meeting with Putin, and Putin asked him a question about some stuff, and the answer was about evacuation. It was about evacuations, I believe. And he mentioned something about some numbers or whatever, and Putin was visibly upset that this had been said, and it was said live, so it couldn't be hidden or anything. So he responded with, that is where did you get this information from? Because this information is related to the military, and only the military can give you this information. Any other source of information isn't actually information. And he was, because it was kind of piercing that veil of normalcy of, oh, there's nothing really big going on here. Well, there was. Congratulations, you just had 1,000 square kilometers of land taken within a month by the people that you've been at war with for 2.5 years. And so you can see that even though the political structure may have been changed, there's still those same forces alive today, and they're these techniques, these approaches, these viewpoints, they're very effective. They're not effective because they're good or anything. They're effective because they're aimed at being viral. That's really what it is. These were memes. These were memes before memes were a thing outside of academic discussions. These memes go back before the World Wide Web. If I say before the internet, people come out and say, "Oh, you were on the internet before the 90s." Yeah, okay, fine. But before the World Wide Web made things like pictures, modern day memes. But a meme is just an idea. It's not just a picture with a funny caption on it. And it's transmissible. And it's effective. It's effective. And we still see that in our society today. And the whole reason why I talk about 1991, and Jesus Jones was earlier this week on Tuesday. And I've been fighting to get this episode out since then, but I had to I had to let it sit there and kind of make this kind of more cohesive, I guess. Had to straighten out in my mind how I wanted to present it. I heard right here, right now, playing at my workplace over the speakers. Hit me like a punch in the gut. It really did, because that was 1991 was a year I really became aware of events around the world, and there was all this hope, all this joy, all this and I knew that it wasn't like the end of history or any of that other BS that was applied to it. Because history doesn't end, right? There's always another chapter to the book. But it seemed to be a big transition, a casting away of the dark parts of history, because it wasn't just. This was not just related to Europe. 1991, there's a big speech on the economy given in India by a member of their legislature, and it caused a lot of reforms that opened up India to more business. Instead of being tightly controlled by the state, became businesses were allowed to become much more independent, be more capitalistic. Free enterprise became much more feasible there. You had South Korea. Local government became a thing in South Korea, where there is actually delegation of authority from the central power. Because don't forget, South Korea, after the Korean War, was a military dictatorship that we propped up for decades. It wasn't until the 80s that the military dictatorship gave way to a form of democracy. And it wasn't until 1991, that magical year, that the central government allowed some of its powers to devolve to the local level. And I mean that's a huge thing. I don't pretend that democracy is just about everybody going to the polls and casting a vote for one for the national leader or whatever. It's about local decisions being made locally as well. It has to be at the grassroots. If it doesn't exist at the grassroots, then it doesn't really exist. It's just a label. And so, I mean, this was not something that was just a European thing. And listening to that song just brought it all home about just what a lost opportunity 1991 really was, and all this stuff was happening. In some places like South Korea, okay, their stuff worked. India, those economic reforms have lasted, at least as far as I know. Now, somebody might have a different view, and if so, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear what you had to say on the matter. I'm not an expert on India by any means, especially modern India, and I'd love to get other people's perspectives. But just the possibilities of a better future just seemed endless. And I mean, for a lot of us, the present is better than it would have been. You could argue, but a lot of the possibilities were never realized. There's been a lot of backsliding because at the end of the day, democracy is kind of fragile. It's something that has to be nurtured, something that has to be protected by the people themselves. And it has to be understood, it has to be supported. Those that know how democracy works, those who know what citizenship means, need to teach those who don't, both within your society and within other societies when people ask for help. It's not going to solve all the problems of the world overnight. And, we don't know what would be happening in some other timeline where the U.S. did send over all their civics teachers for 2 years to teach in Russia. We don't know. Maybe the same stuff would have happened. Maybe the rise of Putin was an inevitable social force that just couldn't be denied. Fact is, we didn't even try. And a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas, but it's a lesson, right? We can't undo the past, but we can keep our eyes open for opportunities to do better in the future. I mean, America screws up quite a bit. Our leaders screw up a lot of the time because our leaders do things that we don't really know about. They make decisions that we don't pay attention to because they don't impact our daily lives. But those decisions that don't impact our daily lives are the ones most likely to impact the daily lives of others. And that's important. That's important. I've in the past been really down about American military power. We're too powerful. No country should have this amount of military dominance. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And all it takes is, I tell people every good company is one CEO change away from being a bad company. Just like and similarly in the U.S., we're one bad election away from having somebody very bad in power, and that's always been the case. It's always been the case. Sometimes the choices are less obvious than others. Sometimes sometimes the consequences are much more obvious than others. But not. But sometimes the important elections, in fact, usually the important elections are the primaries, not the general election. Because the primaries in our system is the primary elections that determine who's going to be on the general ballot, and that's the place where a lot of the best candidates lose out. The best candidates meaning the best in terms of being willing to do good for the common person rather than the established powers that be. That's a different episode. That's a different. This is too long as it is, and I apologize. Brevity is not one of my strong points. But I just wanted to, because I know there are a lot of people out there lived through the same stuff that I did. There's a lot of people out there who haven't lived through that stuff, who they see the repercussions, maybe they hear the word, but the awareness of some of the things that happened and the decisions that were made, the decisions that weren't made, it's important to understand that, so that if you decide to go out and do better, be a leader, stand up and try to do something good, you should understand what hasn't been done as well as what has been done. U.S. could be a huge source for good, a huge force for good. I mean, we have been to a lot of people. We've also been the villain to a lot of people as well. Can't undo that damage. We can't undo that harm. But we can say no more. We can say that, oh, we're going to do better, right? We're going to do better. That's all we can do. It's the only way to move forward. You know, you apologize, you recognize what you've done wrong, and then you do better. Remember that from my days of growing up Catholic. Grew up both Catholic and Lutheran, but the Catholic side really big on repentance, which wasn't just asking forgiveness, but an act of contrition as well. I screwed up, and I had to pay my penance. I have to do my contrition so that to try not because I can undo it, but because there has to be this more than words, which is another song. More than words. Sorry. I get distracted by music. I'm sorry. What can I say? Without the contrition, without the penance, there can't be absolution. But it also requires something else. You can't be forgiven for doing the same thing over and over again. It means you haven't learned anything. It means that you're not really contrite. It means that, yeah, you paid your penance and all this stuff, but you go out and you do the same thing over and over again, all that doesn't matter. All it shows is that your heart hasn't changed. And that's what needs to happen. We need to change our hearts. Not to be, I wouldn't even say to be softer. We need to change our hearts to be more resolute. To be more more resolute. Not to be harder, but to be firmer in our convictions. Really to put an end to this realpolitik that has governed us for a long, long time. We really should put conditions on what it means to be our ally, to be our friend, to benefit from our protection. And it needs to be more than, oh, this is convenient. We should have always, but going forward, we need to be saying, hey, are you willing to help foster democracy? Are you willing to be there for your own people? Are you willing to obey the rule of law? I mean, we're not the best at it ourselves. We have a ways to go in that regard ourselves. No doubt about it. But again, that's something that can be overcome. That's something we can do better at ourselves. And I think that that's something that we should work on. We should work on how we frame our friendship, our alliances, as well as how we ourselves directly act toward and upon others. Just a thought. Anyway, if you find this at all useful or helpful or entertaining or, you know, important, or even if you didn't hate it, give it a like, you know. I'm help other people find it through the algorithm, and I hope you have a good day. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I hope your next week is a good one.